Fresh meat.
Hey folks, this is Pat Quinn with the JoBlo Movie Network, welcoming film fans worldwide for another round of Show Me the Sequel. As always, we're focusing on a genre film that never got the follow-up it perhaps deserved. I'll start with a quick recap, share some behind-the-scenes stories, and then pitch my concept for a sequel. Today, we're checking out an 80s flick that some call a classic and others a guilty pleasure. From director Joel Schumacher, the man who gave Batman nipples, I bring you The Lost Boys. The 1980s was a great decade to be a kid going to the movies. This was the era of Steven Spielberg, Back to the Future, and every cast member from Saturday Night Live making awesome movies like Ghostbusters, Beverly Hills Cop, and My Stepmother is an Alien. Alright, maybe scratch that last one. This was also the era of John Hughes, Kevin Bacon, Ferris Bueller, and Fast Times at Ridgemont High. And the 80s were awesome for horror movies. Freddy, Jason, Fright Night, Poltergeist, and more Stephen King movies that we knew what to do with. And then there's The Lost Boys, whose tagline says it all. Sleep all day, party all night, never grow old, never die. It's fun to be a vampire. The film starts with Lucy, played by Dianne Wiest, and her two sons, Michael and Sam, played by Jason Patric and Corey Haim, moving to Santa Carla, a Northern California beach town known for its popular boardwalk along with being the murder capital of the world. Recently divorced, Lucy has brought them here to stay with her father, a crusty old coot played by Bernard Hughes, an actor who, back in the day, specialized in playing crusty old coots.
We got some rules around here.
Lucy gets a job at a local video store owned by Max, played by Edward Herman. Sam makes friends with the Frog Brothers, Edgar and Allan, played by Corey Feldman and Jameson Newlander. According to the Frog Brothers, Santa Carla's murder rate is due to the town's population of vampires. One night, Michael and Sam go down to the boardwalk. The beach is packed with kids. Bonfires are burning. Teenage hormones are out of control. That's when Michael spots Jamie Gertz, whose character is named for no particular reason, Star. Unfortunately for Michael, Star is hooked up with David, played by Kiefer Sutherland, sporting a bleach blonde mullet and the best sneer in the business. David and his gang invite Michael to go party, which leads to him drinking David's blood, thinking it's only wine. Michael wakes up the next day in his own bed, confused, hungry, and lacking a reflection in the mirror. Sam accuses his brother of becoming a vampire. Michael promises to fix things and goes in search of Star for help. They end up in the sack, so Sam asks the Frog Brothers for advice. They tell him that Michael is only half transformed, and if they can kill the vampire leader, his brother will return to normal. David tries to lure Michael into killing when they hunt down some kids partying on the beach, but Michael refuses. Meanwhile, Lucy has started dating Max. At first, Sam and the Frog Brothers think Max might be the leader, but then decide it must be David. Which makes sense. He's the one with the badass blonde mullet. Michael leads them to the vampire cave where they sleep during the day. The Frog Brothers pound a stake through one vampire's chest, but the others wake up, including David. They make their escape and manage to save Star, who it turns out is also a half-vampire, as well as Laddie, a child half-vampire who Star has adopted. Knowing David will come for revenge, Michael, Sam, and the others barricade themselves in their house with holy water, garlic, and wooden stakes. The vampires break in, and one by one are killed until only David is left. He and Michael battle, and David gets impaled on the horns of a deer head, but nothing happens. Michael, Star, and Laddie are still half vampires. At that point, Lucy and Max return home from a date. It turns out that Max is the head vampire after all. His plan was to marry Lucy and create a vampire family. Michael and the others are no match for Max, and he is inches away from putting the bite on Lucy. Then we hear a honking horn and the sound of an approaching vehicle. It's Grandpa, who drives his truck through the side of the house, sending a flying stake into Max's chest. Max goes up in a pre-CGI puff of smoke. Michael, Star, and Laddie return to normal, and the film ends as Grandpa pops open a beer, grumbling about how much he hates vampires. The original screenplay for The Lost Boys was written by Jan Fisher and James Jeremias. That version was pitched as a Goonies type of film with 5th and 6th grade kid vampires. So it's no surprise that Goonies director Richard Donner was first attached to make the film. The story was inspired by Peter Pan, and in fact, Kiefer Sutherland's character was originally named Peter rather than David. And like the Lost Boys and Peter Pan, the vampires were just kids who never grew old. but the production stalled and Richard Donner moved on to direct Lethal Weapon. Eventually, Joel Schumacher was hired to take over as director. Joel Schumacher, who recently passed away at 80 years old, started out as a fashion designer graduating from the Otis Parsons School of Design. He moved into costume design and began amassing film credits, including Woody Allen's 1972 sci-fi comedy Sleeper. From there, he became a production designer and eventually a screenwriter. Would it surprise you to know that Joel Schumacher wrote the scripts for both Car Wash and The Wiz? The success of those two films led to him directing two made-for-TV movies, and eventually his first feature film, The Incredible Shrinking Woman, starring Lily Tomlin. That film is notable mainly for Rick Baker's amazing gorilla suit. Schumacher followed that up with DC Cab, which isn't notable for much of anything unless you're a really big Mr. T fan. But it was his third film, 1984's St. Elmo's Fire, that put Joel Schumacher on the map. This film, along with The Breakfast Club, is ground zero for anyone who grew up with the Brat Pack. Rob Lowe recreating St. Elmo's Fire with a lighter and a can of hairspray? That's pure gold. It's not a surprise that the first thing Joel Schumacher did was to change the 5th grade vampires into teenagers. Jeffrey Boehm was brought in for a rewrite and pretty much created a new script. Boehm had just finished two very different projects, David Cronenberg's The Dead Zone and the Martin Short comedy Inner Space. Along with adding Starr as a love interest, Boehm created the Bernard Hughes grandpa character, feeling that the original script was really lacking in crusty old coots. Location filming was done in Santa Cruz, which not only has a famous boardwalk, but back in the 1970s was really known as the murder capital of the world. 3 different serial killers committed 28 murders between 1970 and 1973. That in itself is a story someone should make a movie about. As he had with St. Elmo's Fire, Schumacher put together an impressive cast of stars in the making, including Jason Patric, Kiefer Sutherland, Alex Winter, and Jamie Gertz. It was also the first time that Corey Feldman and Corey Haim worked together, which introduced the dubious concept of the two Coreys to the world. They would soon star together in the not-so-classic films License to Drive and Dream a Little Dream. Released in the summer of 1987, the film was a hit with audiences and critics. A big part of its appeal was the soundtrack, which included a cover of the Doors song People Are Strange by Echo and the Bunnymen, and the movie's theme song, Cry Little Sister by Gerard McMahon. But I want to talk for a minute about the key track on the album, and some would say the most iconic moment in the film. Jason Patric and Corey Haim and a crowd of hundreds watching a half-naked, muscle-bound man covered in body oil with chains around his neck, playing the saxophone and egging the crowd to still believe. The song, I Still Believe, was originally by The Call. The half-naked man was musician Tim Capello, who for years had been a part of Tina Turner's touring band. He was first noticed by casting agents when he appeared in the video for Tina Turner's song We Don't Need Another Hero from Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. It only took one day to shoot his scenes, and they never actually gave him a costume, so he just made one up for himself, including the chains which he got from Home Depot. And he always oiled up his body when playing live with Tina Turner. At the time, it was just another gig, and he forgot about it. Cut to 25 years later. Guest host John Hamm spoofed Tim Capello's character in a skit on Saturday Night Live. Suddenly, his phone is ringing off the hook. He's getting booked to conventions, promoters are calling him for gigs, and even though he's semi-retired, he gets offered the chance to record his very first solo album. Even at 65 years old, Tim Capello still tours regularly and closes every show with I Still Believe. If that's not a Hollywood success story, I don't know what is. Joel Schumacher went on to direct a wide variety of films, including Flatliners, Falling Down, and The Client. Then in 1993, he directed Batman Forever. That was followed by Batman and Robin, which featured the now infamous bat nipples on George Clooney's costume. Though the film did well at the box office, it pretty much killed the franchise until Christopher Nolan's reboot in 2008. After the failure of Batman and Robin, Joel Schumacher began working on a sequel to The Lost Boys. One was apparently titled The Lost Boys Devil May Cry. Another one was called The Lost Boys The Beginning, which was written by Eric Red, known for writing the awesome vampire film Near Dark. His script was a prequel set in turn-of-the-century San Francisco and was an origin story for David and the rest of the vampires. But the one that supposedly almost got the green light was The Lost Girls. Schumacher's pitch was gorgeous teenage biker chicks that are vampires. I, for one, would pay money to see that. In 2008, Wildstorm Comics released a 4-part series called The Lost Boys: Reign of Frogs. The plot is pretty complicated, but the bottom line is that one of the kids that David hunted on the beach in the original film survived and now leads a new tribe of vampires. Then in 2008, a true sequel was released, Lost Boys: The Tribe. Corey Feldman once again plays Edgar Frog, and Corey Haim has a cameo as Sam. An interesting bit of casting was having Kiefer Sutherland's half-brother Angus play Shane Powers, the character that was introduced in the comic book. For the most part, the plot is a rehash of the first film. That was followed 2 years later by Lost Boys: The Thirst, with Corey Feldman and Jason Newlander returning as his brother Alan. This time around, a vampire DJ is giving out a drug at raves that turns kids into vampires. Both films went straight to DVD and have a big fat 0 on the tomato meter. Need I say more? That being said, here's my pitch for a sequel that I'm calling Lost Boys: Blood Communion. Fade in on a small rustic village in southern Italy. Michael, once again played by Jason Patric, arrives at a local monastery. The head abbot leads him to an underground Capuchin crypt. Sleeping in the shadows are a tribe of vampires. Michael begins to pound stakes through their hearts, but the leader wakes up and viciously bites him on the neck. As the vampire drinks his blood, Michael doesn't put up a struggle. The creature begins convulsing as if he's drunk acid and implodes into a bloody mess. Weak but still alive, Michael returns to his seedy hotel room. He takes an IV bag filled with blood from his duffel bag, puts the needle in his vein, and gives himself a transfusion. When the bag is empty, he crawls into bed and passes out. The next morning, a doctor at the village infirmary discovers that someone has stolen IV bags from the blood bank. Later that day, a priest in a local church is preparing for the daily prayer. Michael emerges from the shadows and asks for his help, then takes out 4 stolen bags of blood and asks the priest to bless them. Michael has his own cross and knows the prayers. The village priest has heard stories of a man of the cloth who battles the undead and wonders if he is that man. Michael tells him that he left the clergy after having lost his faith, and that years ago he killed the vampire who bit him, but he has never fully recovered. Mixing his own blood with blood blessed like holy water keeps him human and also kills any vampire who bites him. The priest blesses the IV bags and offers to take his confession. Michael insists that would take days. As he's leaving the church, he gets a text message from his mother Lucy. His brother Sam is dead. Cut to Michael as he walks up to his grandfather's house, back in Santa Clara. The door opens, and it's his mother Lucy, again played by Dianne Wiest. We find out that after their battles with Max and the other vampires, Lucy stayed in Santa Clara since her father refused to leave. Sam stayed as well, while Michael left to join the seminary. With the vampires gone, Santa Clara became a normal community. That is, until 6 months ago, when the murders started again. Sam was convinced that vampires had returned. Then a week ago, some fishermen found his body drained of blood and floating in the ocean. The next day, Michael and Lucy are at Sam's funeral. Michael sees Edgar Frog, again played by Corey Feldman, watching the service from the edge of the cemetery. He and Michael go to a local bar to exchange stories. Edgar tells him that he and his brother Alan had a falling out and he hasn't talked to him since he left Santa Clara 15 years ago. Then, out of the blue, he got a frantic call from Alan saying that the vampires were back and he needed Edgar's help. By the time Edgar got to town, Sam was dead and Alan had disappeared. He and Michael decide to work together to find out what's happened. Edgar has the key to his brother's apartment. They go over there and find the walls covered in newspaper articles dating back over the last year. The articles trace a series of what appear to be random murders. Maps of the East Coast show how these murders started in British Columbia and made their way to Santa Clara. There's a noise outside, but they're on the 3rd floor. The window shatters and 2 vampires fly in. One of them is Kiefer Sutherland, again playing David. They battle and the second vampire bites Michael. But, like the one in Italy, he implodes into a bloody mess. David vows revenge and leaps out the window. They look at the map and see that most of the murders in Santa Clara happened near the boardwalk. Edgar has heard that the boardwalk went bankrupt and has been abandoned for years. The boardwalk is dark, deserted, and slowly crumbling into the ocean. Then shadows emerge. It's a trap. David and a handful of other vampires surround them, including Alan Frog, who's now a half-vampire. David tells them how that night, after Max was killed, he managed to crawl away and slept for decades under the boardwalk until his father came down from the north to save him. Michael is confused. He thought Max was the father of the tribe. David says he's talking about his real father. That's when a tall older man with a mane of long white hair steps into the light. This is the true vampire father. And of course, he's played by Untitled Sutherland. Who else? The vampires attack, but Alan gets in their way, giving Michael and Edgar time to make a run for it. Michael is weak from being bitten earlier, but he tricks David into chasing him up to the top of the roller coaster as the sun begins to rise, burning David to a crisp. Meanwhile, Edgar has started a fire, and the burning roller coaster collapses on the other vampires. As Michael, Edgar, and a now-cured Alan head home, none of them can be sure, did they see Donald Sutherland burn as well? But that can wait for another night.
One thing about living in Santa Carla I never could stomach. All the damn vampires.
There you go. That's my pitch for a sequel to Lost Boys. I hope you liked it, and thanks for watching the show. If you like what you see, please subscribe to our JoBlo Horror Videos channel. Tell your friends who dig this sort of content, and turn on the bell to receive notifications for all of our latest videos. We are an independent company, and we appreciate all your support.